The Detroit Tigers finally have an off day this spring. No spring training games are played yesterday. So we're going to ask ourselves the question, if the season started tomorrow, what would the opening day roster be like? All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Thursday, March 16th, 2023. Thank you for making Locked On Tigers your first listen. Every single day, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Alrighty, so as we said in the cold open there, we had an off day on Wednesday. No spring training games played. I think that's the first off day we've had so far this spring, I think. And so we're going to take a look and just take a crack at the opening day roster. And this is still very fluid. This is this is going to be the opening day roster, and anything that's not this is wrong. Like, we still have almost 2 weeks of spring training left, about a week and a half, little over a week and a half of spring ball left. So it's a very fluid conversation that we will certainly have again as we get closer and closer to opening day. But this is with an off day and no spring games and no really news or notes or observations or anything. This is really the first chance we've had since spring training started to actually take a look and do kind of a deep dive on what the opening day roster could look like. All right, so that's what we're going to do today. Always a fun conversation. Just reiterating, it very much is a conversation. None of this is finite, and none of this is guaranteed. Okay, so I kind of want to break this down into terms of guaranteedness of all of these players, right? So we're going to take a look at the locks on the roster. I have 17 players who I view on March 16th as guaranteed. Not even going to be a discussion. Even as we get closer and closer to opening day, probably not going to be much of a discussion. Close to, if not certainties, to be on the opening day roster. Then I have close to locks, which are whether they're trending up or honestly, all three of the ones I have are really for the wrong reason trending down. Not quite guarantees, but also would be a big surprise if they weren't on the opening day roster. And then it's all comes down to those other 6 spots for me. Okay, 26-man roster. I have 20 that I'm fairly confident about will all be on the opening day roster, and then 6 more that are really big discussions that I think you can kind of mix and match in a lot of different ways. All right, so let's start with the locks. That's the easy part. We'll get that over with. DH, Miguel Cabrera, the biggest lock on the team, whether you like it or not, the big fella, the farewell tour. He's not going anywhere. He's certainly going to be here at least for opening day this season. That much we can guarantee. Outfield, Matt Vierling, Austin Meadows, Riley Green. 3 outfield spots locked, which is really good. I mean, that's a great sign. We do have a huge conversation involving 4th outfielder, which we'll get to later. And last year at times, for actually more than just at times, for a pretty substantial amount of time, carried 5 outfielders on this roster. So definitely a conversation to have there. But 3 locks in the outfield. In the infield, I have 3 locks. Now, we'll get to Jonathan Scope. I'm not saying he's not making the roster or anything. But as far as like guaranteed, I'm 100% certain they're on the opening day roster. The 3 infielders I have are Spencer Torkelson, Nick Maton, and Javi Baez. Okay? Those 3, I don't see any reality in which they're not on the opening day roster. Catcher, 2 locks, Eric Haas and Jake Rogers. Both of them. Boom, boom. That's pretty much the catcher situation on opening day. We'll talk a little bit about Donnie Sands later, but for the most part, that's going to be your catching tandem heading into the season. So that's 9 players before we even get to the pitchers. That's 9 position players that we have as locks on this team. Now, on the pitching side of things, for the starting rotation, Eduardo Rodriguez, Matthew Boyd, Spencer Turnbull, Michael Lorenzen. Again, we'll talk about Matt Manning in a second. Don't think he's not necessarily just like not making the team, but I think he's played so far this spring, played his way out of the locks category for sure. So those 4 starting pitchers pretty much can guarantee they're going to be there. Relief pitchers. Now, this is the most fluid situation on the entire roster, right? Like comfortably. This is the most fluid situation. You have, for me, the locks are Alex Lang, Jason Foley, Mason Englert, and Jose Cisnero. That's only four guys. I think it's somewhat presumed that they're going to carry 8 relievers. Obviously, it's give or take one, right? If they really want to get crazy, they could carry 9, I guess. And if they want to go a little shallower because they have a lot of dudes who can go multiple innings, maybe they go 7. They're like another infielder or utility bat or something. But I think it's relatively safe to say you're going to see 8 relievers on this roster. Okay, so that leaves half of the bullpen still kind of up for grabs as we get through the locks. So that's 17 players. 17 players that we view right now on March 16th as, you know what, these dudes are almost certainly going to find themselves onto the roster. Now, when it comes to I have them as close to locks, very creative name. These are players that I have as not guarantees as of today, but I'm still pretty sure they're going to be on the opening day roster. Okay, one is Jonathan Scope. Again, I wasn't leaving him off the locks list because I'm saying that he's not going to make the roster or that it's he's played so poorly that they should cut him or whatever. I'm not that extreme with it, but he has undeniably gone a very, very long time without a stretch of good baseball in the batter's box, at least. Obviously, was a Gold Glove candidate last year, but offensively, I mean, in multiple leagues, we're talking dating back to last year at Major League Baseball. We're talking back in his home country. We're talking struggles. World Baseball Classic. We're talking struggles. Like we have gone, and then spring obviously wasn't great before he left either. We've just gone so long without seeing Jonathan Scope hit the baseball well for really any period of time that I think it's really hard for me to just be like, yeah, 100%, he's going to be there. But it's still like 80, 85, maybe even 90%. I still think it's that's a heck of a message to send. To just be like, yeah, Jonathan Scope's like getting cut. That would be a heck of a message to send throughout the clubhouse. And as it stands right now, I'm still fairly certain that Jonathan Scope's going to be not only on this team, but probably the opening day starting second baseman. Okay. Starting pitcher, Matt Manning, falls into somewhat of a similar category to Scope. Now, the difference is Manning's is go to AAA, whereas Scope's is don't be on the roster at all and get cut. Those are very different things, obviously, but I do think that Matt Manning, again, just with his play this spring, I think he's far from a lock at this point. There's already some rumblings of people that think that he should start off the season in AAA, kind of get his calm down, make some adjustments, get his stuff together, and then come back in the middle of the season. But I still, if the season started tomorrow, I would still be relatively surprised if Matt Manning was not on the opening day rotation. But I he's gonna have to have a good start here. I think this is a situation that is one of the most fluid on the team, I guess. Like this is one where if he turns around and his next 2 starts before opening day are solid, then this is not even a conversation. He's 100% going to be on the opening day roster. He moves back into the lock category. But every single start that goes by where he doesn't look good, that meter of like percent chance that he is going to find himself on the outside looking in and find himself in Toledo to start off the season objectively gets higher and higher. So we'll keep an eye on that. That's really his is, like I said, probably the most fluid. His is truly, in my opinion, like a start to start basis. It would not shock me if his last 2 starts of the spring, if they went really, really poorly, if this was a very legitimate conversation and he was really kind of on the border, especially if dudes like Bo Brisky and honestly, for the most part, Joey Wentz continue to look relatively solid in the spring. Joey Wentz, again, specifically, has looked really good this spring. I don't know. I think that this conversation can be more and more of a heated conversation as we get closer and closer to opening day. But for now, I'm putting him on close to locks and still expect him to be on the opening day rotation. Okay, we have one more in the close to locks category in our bullpen. We will talk about that right after I tell y'all about our friends over at FanDuel. It's the midway point of the NBA season. It's the perfect time to download the FanDuel Sportsbook app, America's #1 sportsbook, because now new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line, point scores, three-pointers drained, etc. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets at a chance to win a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to fanduel.com/locked on. That's fanduel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, everybody. Welcome back here, segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. I appreciate y'all for tuning in as always. Talking about the spring training roster here. This is, again, I'll reiterate, this is still very fluid. This is still very much a conversation. I also want to point out that the opening day roster, I think, doesn't mean nearly as much as some people think that it does. Not that that's not like a great honor. I totally understand it from the player's perspective. Like, being chosen when everyone or most people are healthy and being chosen to like start off the season on the team is obviously a really big deal. And I'm not trying to take away from that at all. But as far as like roster construction and like the front office, I don't think like we're gonna see a million relievers this year, right? Like we're gonna see a ton of relief pitchers this year. We're gonna see a lot of dudes play third base this season, even the ones that aren't gonna start off the season on the major league roster. So I think, especially for a team that is in the current position of the Detroit Tigers, it just it's going to be, I don't want to use this word a million times and annoy everybody, but it really is going to be so fluid throughout the season. Like I don't think that the opening day roster just is going to hold a ton of weight like in July when we're like, oh, well, this dude was on the opening day roster. He's going to have the slight leg up when he comes back from an injury or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's just, it's going to be so performance based that I don't think it means as much as a lot of people think. That's all. So again, mostly just because the Tigers are where they are. You know, there are some teams that it's a much bigger deal, but this year I think it's gonna there's gonna be a lot of changes and a lot of movement throughout the season, and so I wouldn't get too caught up on where somebody's starting off necessarily. If they're hitting and they're producing, they're gonna find their way back on the major league roster no matter where they start. Okay, let's talk about the last person on my close to locks conversation, okay? And that would be Tyler Alexander. This is still somebody who I expect to be on the opening day roster, as I've said about the previous two. But he hasn't had a very good spring. His velocity's been down a little bit. And I think they really like the versatility. He's obviously a lefty, which is always going to hold value, especially in a bullpen that isn't too deep with lefties at the major league level at the moment. So I still fully expect him to make the roster, but just based on the spring, it's been a little bit of a slow start, and I don't think he's like some untouchable. Yeah, he's just like guaranteed. Like if he continues to struggle, and some other of the younger pitchers or minor league invites or whatnot do really well, especially the lefties on that, it could be a little bit more of a conversation than maybe I gave it credit for earlier in the spring as well. Okay, so there you go. That's 20 guys. That's 20 players that I currently have on the opening day roster. That leaves 6 players. And this is really where the meat and potatoes of this conversation happens. This is where the bulk of this of this debate is going to take place. In my opinion, when constructing the roster through these 20 guys, the players that you need left, you need 1 fourth outfielder, you need 3 relief pitchers, and you need 2 utility infielders. Okay? We got 20. You got 6 roster spots left. Need a backup outfielder. Need to finish off the bullpen and end at 8 relievers. And you need 2 guys that can play utility infield. At least one of those 2 needs to be able to play first base as well. Okay? Let's start with fourth outfield. I think that is, I don't want to use the word easiest, but I think that is somewhat the most clear-cut conversation as of today. Okay. And that is really out of everybody in the mix, it's Akil Badu, Kerry Carpenter, or Parker Meadows. But that decision has kind of already been made as he got optioned to AAA. He will not start the season on the opening day roster. So really, you're having a conversation of Akil Badu or Kerry Carpenter if you're looking at like legitimate candidates to make this team. And I'm leaning Akil Badu. I have been all spring. Kerry Carpenter undeniably has the higher ceiling when it comes to power potential. I think Akil Badu has the higher ceiling in pretty much every other category on a baseball field. And if Kerry Carpenter hits, then he can hit his way onto this roster, undeniably. He did at the end of last season, right? And Akil Badu hit his way off of the roster for a large chunk of last season. So, again, very, very fluid roster, but on opening day right now, especially with all of the incentive that is out there to be more aggressive on the base paths going into the start of the season, I think you're going to be really hard pressed to leave Badu off this roster. Also, Kerry Carpenter, I don't believe at the time of this recording has drawn a single walk all spring. Akil Badu draws a lot of walks, even if his batting average isn't high. All right. And so I think that just plays to kind of the mindset and the culture and the identity of this baseball team, at least what they want it to be going into the start of the season. So that's Akil Badu, 21st guy on the roster. Boom. Fourth outfielder, check. Oh, the bullpen. Do I want to save the bullpen for last? Or do I want to do it right now? Let's do the bullpen right now. Okay, let's just get this over with, I guess. Players in the running for bullpen. Now, this is no matter how high of a percent chance you have, no matter how in the running you are or how little in the running you are, this is everyone I think has even a 1% chance to make this bullpen out of camp. Okay? You are looking at Garrett Hill, Will Vest, Edwin Usita, I can never say his last name, Tyler Holton, Bo Brisky, Alex Faedo, Joey Wentz, Miguel Diaz, Chasen Shreve, Trey Winginter, Matt Whistler, Trevor Rosenthal, Miguel Del Pozo, Angel DeJesus, and Elvis Alvarado. That's a lot of names. Okay? A lot of names. I think if you are to look at let's start with our four starting pitchers we kind of always clump together. Okay. That is Bo Brisky, Garrett Hill, Alex Faedo, and Joey Wentz. I think Alex Faedo is going to start the season in the minors. I don't think that he has done enough in spring. And I think even coming into the spring, he was always kind of on the outside looking in. I think they still have just more developmentally that they want to do with Faedo. And I also think we're at a point where we need to decide now what his role is going to be for the rest of his career. We can't keep playing the is Alex Faedo a starter or a reliever or we don't know game forever. And last year, I know that those were not common circumstances. Like there was a ton of injuries and you kind of just had to throw them into the fire there. I get it. But I think we need to make a decision on that. And I think that that decision will be made in the minor leagues pretty early on. If it hasn't already, it's probably already been made, to be honest with you, whether it's between the coaching staff or him or both. Okay. Joey Wentz. Joey Wentz is a fascinating one to me because I think that Joey Wentz is the best starting pitcher on this team that's not one of the assumed 5 starting pitchers. And it's very difficult for me to try and gauge whether this organization wants to move Joey Wentz to the bullpen because he's been really good in the spring and he'd be another lefty out of the pen. And then you wouldn't have to call him up if a starter got hurt and he'd already be there. And logistically, it just makes a lot more sense to put him in the pen. And then if an injury happens in the starting rotation, boom, Joey Wentz is already there. Or if they want to go, no, your future is as a starter. We don't even want you to pitch out of the bullpen. So they start him in Toledo, and he's like the ace of the Toledo Mud Hens. And then he's the first person called up if they need another start, and one of the starting pitchers goes down. I don't know which direction they're leaning. I truly don't. I think Joey Wentz could be a really good starting pitcher. I've always been a really big Fan of Joey Wentz ever since the trade happened. I really like his stuff. I think he has looked spectacular this spring. I have loved what he's been doing with the pitch mix. I love his velocity so far. He has been really, really solid. And I don't want to send him to the minors. I don't. I think that he is one of the six best starting pitchers in this organization right now. Maybe even one of the five best starting pitchers in the organization right now, depending on your opinion of Matt Manning, to be honest with you. So like it frustrates me, but at the same time, I don't know if I just want to look at Joey Wentz and be like, yeah, put him in the pen until we need him. And then you have that like weird Willie Peralta thing where like, can he just go from being a reliever to straight into being a starter? Or do you want him to continue to develop as a starting pitcher? And I think if I had to guess today, I would say that they want him to develop as a starting pitcher more than just guarantee him a spot on the major league roster no matter what. So while I think he's probably better than some of the players that I'm going to have in this bullpen, I think for developmental reasons, it probably makes more sense, unfortunately, to start him in Toledo. But certainly not a slight against him. Okay. Let's get into the players I actually do have in this bullpen and a couple of more conversations surrounding that. But first, I got to tell y'all about our friends over at the Ultimate Pro Baseball GM game. It is the best. I'm really excited to continue telling you guys about this. I know we brought it up for the first time earlier this week, but it's our new partner and sponsor of today's episode, Ultimate Baseball GM. If you've ever dreamed of being an MLB GM, kind of like what we're doing today, and managing your professional baseball franchise, well, your dream can come true. And this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team. Play through the season, lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches, the right staff, managing team finances, scouting and drafting players, managing difficult personalities, navigating your franchise through free agency, all the ups and downs of the season, the trade deadline, the offseason, etc. All of this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Baseball GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want, when you want to. Once the game is downloaded, you don't need Wi-Fi to play. You can play wherever, whenever, once you have it downloaded. And Locked On Tigers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On in the game store. So make sure you check it out. To download the game, just visit probaseballgm.com. Scan the code on the screen or look it up in the app stores. That's probaseballgm.com, the Ultimate Baseball GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. We're talking about the opening day roster. So let's talk about the players that I think are going to make this bullpen. Garrett Hill. I really like what I've seen out of Garrett Hill this year. I think that I know you could make a similar argument to Joey Wentz, but I think he's looked so good out of the pen. Really good velocity when you cut his innings down. That fastball sinker combo is really, really good. 96, 97 miles an hour. I've loved what I've seen out of Garrett Hill. I want him in my bullpen on opening day. So he's going to slate in there. Now, 23, the 23rd spot is interesting. I have Bo Brisky. Now, I know what I just said about Joey Wentz, and I know that a lot of that could also apply to Bo Brisky. So with Bo, the difference is Joey Wentz in the spring has done a lot of starting, whereas Bo Brisky has come out of the bullpen quite a lot in this spring and has been the second or third dude out of the pen and pitched one or two innings. And we've seen his velocity go up when he did so. And that leads me to believe that they're somewhat preparing him for that and trying to get him to get a feel for getting comfortable in that role. Do I think that Bo Brisky will never start a baseball game ever again at the major league level? Absolutely not. I think he will probably this season. But I think that they're way more comfortable with the versatility in Bo Brisky coming out of the bullpen as well than they are with other players. And so I do have Bo Brisky in my bullpen and on my major league roster, but I can totally understand if they went, no, we want him to develop as a starter, and kind of gave him the same fate that I believe they're going to give Joey Wentz. Okay. So that's who I have there. Then the last person out of the pen I have is Chasen Shreve. He's had a really good spring, and he's a lefty. And he's got really good secondary pitches. His secondary is almost his primary. Well, it is honestly his primary, right? His breaking stuff is he throws a boatload. So I really like what I've seen out of him. Again, gives you another lefty if Tyler Alexander makes the roster as well. Then you finally have some versatility with left-handers. You're not just rolling into camp with one lefty on the team. I really like that as well. So as far as notable omissions that I want to keep an eye on, I have loved what I've seen from Miguel Diaz this spring. I'm keeping a close eye on him. I think he could play his way onto the roster. Will Vest, a notable omission. I think probably the most notable omission from my list here. I said it earlier this week and earlier in the spring. I don't think Will Vest is like some guaranteed lock to make this roster just because he pitched a lot out of the bullpen for the team last year. He was optioned at one point, and then injuries happened and he had to come back. Like, he was on the outside looking in last year. And I don't know. He hasn't really been very good in the spring. His ERA, I think, is like over 20 at the time of this recording. He's kind of got rocked a few times. He'll stay with the organization for sure. Again, opening day rosters don't hold as much weight, I think, as people think. Will Vest will certainly pitch in a Detroit Tigers uniform out of the bullpen at some point this year. But to start off the season, I do have him on the outside looking in. Tyler Holton, one of the pickups, I think that he could potentially play his way into more of a conversation there. Trey Winginter, that was a really close call for me. He's looked really good in the spring. He has very nasty swing and miss stuff, has been injury riddled the last several seasons. I could 100% see a reality in which he plays his way onto the roster. Matt Whistler has had a really, really brutal spring, to be honest with you. I think he's kind of played his way out of that conversation. But at some point, if he makes some tweaks in the minors and fixes some things, he could be getting a call relatively early in the year. Trevor Rosenthal, I just don't think is realistic health-wise and ramping up-wise. And I think that's pretty much the only players I want to highlight there. Again, we said a lot of names. There's a lot of people in the conversation there, but I think those are kind of the main ones I wanted to highlight. Let's get into utility infield, and then we'll wrap this up and kind of recap what the roster looks like. So, of all the players that are in the conversation here for utility infield, we need two. We have 24 players on our roster right now. So, Cesar Hernandez, Andy Ibanez, Jermaine Palacios, Tyler Nevin, Ryan Kreidler, and Zach Short. Okay. I know that there's been a lot of Zach Short hype. I still don't have him on my opening day roster, but I understand it. I understand the fit. I understand the identity fit, and he's objectively had a really, really good spring training. Okay. So I don't fault people who are leaning kind of on the Zach Short train. It's just, it's not for me yet. Okay. Ryan Kreidler. I need to see some consistent hitting, man. I really do. It's we're a couple of years removed now from the really hot minor league season he had offensively. We need to see some of that at the higher levels. I know that he had the hand injury. Who knows how much that played into it last year, the broken hand. But it hasn't translated into a ton of offense so far in the spring yet either. I don't need Ryan Kreidler on my opening day roster. I think we put him in Toledo. If he swings a hot stick and starts hitting like he did 2 years ago in 2021, then boom, he's going to get a quick call. But I think to start off the season, I'd have him down there. Palacios, I love as a depth bat. He's been really, really good in the spring, has done nothing wrong, kind of just on the outside looking in for me. 25, Cesar Hernandez is making my roster. You guys know that I have really liked what I've seen from him so far in the spring. I've been very open about that. I think that he's a great fit. He can kind of play multiple positions in the infield. He's taken some really professional at-bats. I've really liked what I've seen from Cesar Hernandez. He's going to get the 25th spot on this roster for me. Then it really comes down to me between Andy Ibanez and Tyler Nevin for the last spot. And I think that that is a real battle going on in this front office and in this coaching staff room, in this clubhouse. I think that those two are fighting for the last utility spot. Because I think Cesar Hernandez has pretty much proven, like, hey, I should probably be on the opening day roster. Okay. I think it's really between those two for that 26 spot. Now, the problem is both are hurt, which is somewhat hilarious and very on brand for the Detroit Tigers. But Andy Ibanez hurt himself right when he went over in an exhibition game for the World Baseball Classic, playing for Team Cuba. He's still with Team Cuba, and they are advancing past the group stages. So we'll see kind of what happens there. But I mean, who knows? We talked about him. I think he's a good fit as well. He has also played first base, which Cesar Hernandez doesn't play first base, has never played first base. Andy Ibanez has experience at first. Tyler Nevin is also a corner of the field type of guy. And he was swinging a really hot stick before he got hurt. I think oblique, right? So we will see. I currently have Andy Ibanez, and that's really only because I think that he is closer to full health than Tyler Nevin. But I don't know any injury updates that y'all don't know. And if either of them comes back and starts hitting like they did before they were hurt, I think they could run away with the job. And I expect both of them to play Tigers baseball, honestly, at some point. But really, that might be a job that really goes down to the wire. Because Nevin can play third and first. That gives them another option at third base, which might help. And obviously, is the safety valve thing at first base kind of gives them a little bit more versatility there rather than just torque guaranteed every day. But Ibanez has played all over the infield, including first base as well. So I'm leading Ibanez right now, but I mean, do not get it twisted. That is a very, very close race. So let's end with just going over the final roster that I have. So currently, March 16th, if the season started today, my roster would be starting pitchers: Erod, Turnbull, Matt Boyd, Michael Lorenzen, and Matt Manning. My bullpen would be Alex Lang, Jason Foley, Mason Englert, Jose Cisnero, Tyler Alexander, Garrett Hill, Bo Brisky, and Chasen Shreve. My catchers would be Eric Haas and Jake Rogers. My infield would be Javi Baez, Torkelson, Jonathan Scope, Nick Maton, Cesar Hernandez, and Andy Ibanez. My outfield would be Riley Green, Austin Meadows, Matt Vierling, and Akil Badu. And then the 26th spot is the farewell tour, the big fella, Miguel Cabrera. Okay. The only other conversation we didn't really get a chance to talk about is Donnie Sands. I think I still don't think it's entirely like a 0% chance that they look at Eric Haas and go, you know what? We liked what we've seen out of you from corner outfield. We're going to carry you, Rogers, and Sands and kind of just get crazy with it and take one of those utility infielders away. But that would be 5 outfielders and 3 catchers. Like for what? I don't know. And it's not like Donnie Sands has like a 2,000 OPS in the spring or anything. He's not really forcing your hand, even though I do like what I've seen. I don't think he's looked terrible. He's not really forcing you either. So yeah, I think that that's one where we'll keep an eye on it. But I obviously, as I just read the roster, don't think that that's going to happen on opening day. Even though, again, I do expect Donnie Sands to get major league at bats this season. Okay. Okay. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every day. Now, for your next listen, check on the Locked On Fantasy Baseball podcast. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies, and find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, that is all I got for y'all. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. We will keep all of these situations fluid. I know that a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on the roster and on current positional battles and whatnot. This is the really fun part of the spring where all of those debates come to light and we can talk about different strategies and stuff. So, this is it. This is game time for a lot of people. Last 2 weeks of spring, really, really important stretch here. We'll see how it pans out. All right. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch you all tomorrow, baby. Go Tigers.